curious. Why do you think gun ownership is a right?
So I see a human being's ability to defend themselves as a right, and we should be able to defend ourselves as best we can. And I see criminals, they're able to get guns and quite easily because of our rather open border, so they can get these firearms. And it only makes sense for people to be able to defend themselves with firearms. Like if firearms, well, like it's not just self-defense. I think there are other uses for firearms that I think we need them for. And certainly, like along that lines, gun ownership is a right. I think self-defense is one of the biggest things in that. But we also need them for hunting. Like farmers need them to protect their livestock from predators and things. And sports shooting is actually a rather big sector. So I see it as a right. Yeah.
Personally, I think we both are on the same wavelength when it comes to making sure everyone in our, well, as many people in our society can stay safe and succeed. That's like the basic human right.
Yeah.
All of our declarations are based on that. However, I do think there are other ways that we can go about that, which is making me a little bit not quite supportive of the
Okay.
right, but I do understand that yes, they have cultural significance to a certain portion of the population. But I feel like that's outweighed by the possible consequences that having gun ownership specifically as a right instead of being like a tool in Canada.
Okay, so if we were to remove guns from the hands of like civilians, how would we defend ourselves against criminals?
What particular predators are you describing?
So just basic criminals, like they want to rob us or even do worse, there needs to be some means of defending ourselves because the police are not going to be there for us all the time. And when they arrive on a scene, it's usually damage control, not actual prevention. So the preventative measures have to be in the hands of the ones that are being directly impacted. So we need to have a means to defend ourselves somehow, especially if, like say a young family with young children, they need to have a means to defend themselves, right? And I think guns are probably one of the best way to do that.
I agree. The families do need to defend themselves. However, I just feel like guns aren't really the way to go, especially given that guns are incredibly fast. Like there is no response time at all for any criminal. Once someone whips out that gun, it's pretty much over and like bam, they're dead. They can't run away. They can't leave after they recognize, oh, the cost is too high. I want to leave with my life that I am owed as a human being.
So that is not, so a person defending themselves like that, they will usually take the final measure of shooting someone as like a last resort. So often the presence of the firearm is enough to deter an attack. And even like the actual pulling the trigger is not always necessary. But the warning is there, right? So someone like, so the criminals obviously, especially if they commit homicide, they don't really have enough respect for human life. But the person that is defending themselves, not only do they want to defend their life, but they generally will have a much greater respect for that other person's life than the one that is trying to take theirs. So they're not going to be as quick to take that life unless there is someone else that they're trying to protect, like their children, right? So they're not going to be so quick to do it. And if they feel like in that moment that they have to do it, then they're probably going to do it. But it's the deterrence thing that is probably one of the biggest things for me. Like, say, just put yourself in the shoes of a criminal for a second and you want to rob a convenience store or a bank. Say you have your gun with you and you're about to brandish it, but then as you walk in, you see everyone in that bank is a gunslinging cowboy.
Yeehaw!
Well, even just to see those firearms on their hips, that's going to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, right? So the gun doesn't even have to be drawn for it to be a deterrent already, right? And there's so many cases when that has happened. Like, there's footage where you can watch of criminals running into stores with like baseball bats and other things, and then the owner of the store pulls out a small pistol, and they run in absolute terror out of that store, and the crime is averted. So the actual pulling of the trigger is not always necessary, is what I'm trying to say.
This isn't really in the debate realm, more of a question.
Okay.
What do you consider to be like the metric for when someone is allowed to actually have possession of a tool that essentially lets them play God with someone else's life without knowing any of the background info on that person?
Okay. So if someone is not, so maybe I need to give some background to this. So in Canada, it's very difficult to even acquire a firearm legally. Do you know what a POW is? So a possession and acquisition license. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to get your POW, you have to go through a special training course, which is an 8-hour course. Sometimes they split it into 2 days, and you're trained about the rigor of how to safely operate this item, this firearm, and then you have to wait months to know if you've passed or how well you passed. And then once you have that certificate of completion, then you have to wait months as you submit it to the government to even get the license. So the whole process of getting a license to even own a firearm takes months, and it's expensive. And someone, when they go through that process, you know that they have legitimate use for that item, and that they're more than likely not going to use it incorrectly because they've been trained how to use it correctly. And if they're trying to do things legally, then they are probably going to use it for a legal purpose, right? So then we know how difficult that is now. And when we look at the numbers, 98% of the crime, the gun crime in Canada, is not caused by these POW holders, right?
Well, of course, they have
Because
the registration.
they have the registration.
Right. It's like something you get trained to actually learn how to use and handle without accidentally.
But now they have the capacity to defend themselves. See, I think it's a right because this person has, whether they have the firearm or not, they still have the right to defend themselves.
I'm not too sure about Canada's legislation, but on a moral basis, I agree.
Yeah. And so, back to the other thing, it makes sense then that the crime is not done by POW holders. And the guns that are used, 88 to 90% of the time, those guns shouldn't even be in Canada.
Yeah, they're from
right?
USA
the States or other places, right? So those guns shouldn't even be here. And so to know that someone is going to use it correctly, and that knowing that they haven't done it in the past, haven't used it incorrectly in the past, it doesn't make sense to say that they shouldn't have that thing. We can say the knives are dangerous. There's so many things that are inherently dangerous, but the thing becomes deadly in the hands of someone who will use it for harm. Right?
I would also like to add that anything else, that guns especially also become deadly in the hands of someone who is incapable or doesn't quite have the training as someone who's registered under POW.
That's why we have very stringent gun storage laws.
Hence why we shouldn't be making it a common right for the common average person who doesn't know how a silencer even works.
See, It is something that someone can exercise, but they don't have to exercise it. Right? So you have the ability to exercise your free speech, but you don't have to. That is your discretion and your self-will in using that, right? So,
Other ways, but I'll follow along. Let's
yeah.
see what you're thinking. Let's see what
So,
you're thinking.
you don't have to have the gun in your possession or be a gun owner for it to still be your right to be able to be a gun owner. See, I'm saying that everyone has the right to be able to be a gun owner, and we shouldn't remove that from them. But there should be at least some control on who will use it incorrectly. And I would love to know that everyone will use it correctly, but we know criminals won't.
Or people in general just won't.
Well,
People can be stupid.
they can be, but when you go through that training, it's anyway.
Kind of reminds me of like all of those like certifications, but you're allowed to get through training, but you have to get through training in order to be allowed to actually have acts. I just don't think it's like good in general for the common, like every person should be allowed to just walk into a store and say, I deserve to have a gun. Because you can't really say like, I deserve to have a weapon compared to say like, I deserve to speak. I deserve to have the basic necessities for food. That's not inherently going to be risky in terms of harming other people in society.
So the gun itself doesn't have to be used for harm. Like I said before, it is a deterrent measure, but there are other reasons, like not just self-defense, but hunting and sport shooting, that you could have a gun for, and you should be allowed to have that gun for that purpose. But there's another thing that people don't usually talk about, and it's the fact that when you have firearms in the hands of civilians, it's actually a safeguard against dictatorship. So we've seen over and over again, like take Hitler's Germany, for example. In order to usurp complete control over his population, he actually took firearms. Yeah, he did. He took all the firearms away. And suddenly he was able to take control. And then no one could say, oh, you're not taking the Jews and putting them in concentration camps and killing them. No one had the power to say that. So they were powerless in that instance because they didn't have the firearm. And there are other countries like North Korea, they can't have firearms, and like in China it's extremely strict. And those citizens, you can tell that the government doesn't respect their ability to use that weapon wisely when they take it away from them. So, like even take free speech, for example. And I keep going back to this, but if the government doesn't think that you're going to use your ability to speak freely wisely, they're probably going to take it away from you, even though that is your fundamental right. So if the government doesn't respect law-abiding citizens and their ability to use their firearms wisely, they're going to take them away. And that also gives them more control. Because the reason in the States why they have such strong gun culture is because when they were first set up, they
have everyone have guns.
Well,
To fight the British.
to fight the British, but also what they saw the British doing. The British wanted to prevent the colonies from rebelling. So one of the first things that actually sparked the war was the British coming and trying to take away the lead and their muskets and their gunpowder and seize all that.
Talk about the taxes. Okay.
Well, yeah, there was 23 grievances. It wasn't just taxation without representation.
Okay, yeah.
It wasn't just that reason. There were other things. And they saw the British as being oppressive. And the British wanted to continue to be oppressive and to use the colonies, like, without the colonies' consent. And so, in order to keep their control, they attempted to seize the firearms. And that's what actually resulted in the first skirmish, because they actually had the struggle to keep their firearms and take them back from the British.